When an old black man walks into a luxury store, the staff sees him as nothing more than an inconvenience. But their cruel behavior leads to a revelation so shocking, it flips their world upside down, and they'll never forget what happens next. The morning sunlight cast its glow over the bustling streets of downtown. Nestled among high-end boutiques and gourmet cafes was La Mode Luxe, a renowned luxury store known for its extravagant offerings and its pretentious air. Inside, employees bustled about, arranging displays and greeting the occasional well-dressed patron. The atmosphere was polished and cold, a perfect reflection of its elite clientele. Among the perfectly tailored suits and designer heels walked an elderly man, his frame slightly stooped, clad in a simple, well-worn overcoat and scuffed shoes. His grey hair and weathered face spoke of years of experience, but his presence seemed out of place in this world of glamour. As the man hesitated at the entrance, a young sales associate named Tara noticed him. She was a fresh hire, eager to impress her supervisors. Tara nudged her co-worker, James, a senior associate who prided himself on his impeccable style and high sales numbers. "Look at that guy," Tara whispered, gesturing toward the old black man. "Do you think he's lost?" James smirked. "Definitely not our type of customer. Watch, he's probably going to ask for directions or waste our time with some nonsense." The old black man shuffled inside, his eyes scanning the room with quiet curiosity. As he approached the nearest display, James straightened his posture, stepping in front of the man with a thinly veiled air of condescension. "Good morning, sir," James said, his tone dripping with false politeness. "Can I help you with something?" The man smiled warmly, unfazed by James's demeanor. "Yes, I was hoping to take a look at your collection of suits. I'm in need of something special." Tara stifled a laugh. James raised an eyebrow. "Our suits start at $5,000, he said pointedly. "Perhaps you'd like to try the department store down the street." The man's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Thank you for letting me know," he said softly. "I'd still like to see what you have." James sighed dramatically, motioning for Tara to take over. "Go ahead. Humor him," he muttered under his breath before walking away. Tara approached reluctantly, her demeanor no friendlier than James's. "Follow me," she said curtly, leading the man toward a rack of tailored suits. "These are some of our more affordable options." The man examined the suits with genuine interest, running his fingers along the fabric. "Beautiful craftsmanship," he remarked. "Do you have this in a darker shade?" Tara rolled her eyes, tapping her manicured nails against her clipboard. "We do, but as James mentioned, these suits are quite expensive." The man looked at her, his expression calm but firm. "I'd like to try it on, please." Tara hesitated, glancing around the store as if seeking permission. James, observing the interaction from a distance, smirked and shook his head, mouthing, "What a joke." Reluctantly, Tara fetched the requested suit and directed the man to a fitting room. As he stepped inside, she turned to James. "Can you believe this?" she scoffed. "I'm wasting my time on someone who probably can't afford a button from that suit." James laughed. "Let him play dress-up. The sooner he realizes he's out of his league, the sooner he'll leave." Inside the fitting room, the man took his time. He admired the cut of the suit in the mirror, adjusting the lapels with practiced ease. For a moment he seemed lost in thought, his reflection staring back at him as if it held a secret. Outside, Tara checked her watch impatiently. "He's been in there forever," she muttered. "What is he doing, taking a nap?" James smirked. "Should we start a timer? Maybe he's rehearsing for a role as someone who actually belongs here." The door to the fitting room creaked open, and the man emerged. The suit fit him perfectly, accentuating his dignified posture and quiet confidence. Tara and James, however, barely looked up. "I'll take it," the man said simply. Tara blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "Excuse me?" The suit, he repeated. I'll take it. Could you have it tailored for me as well? Tara exchanged a look with James, who rolled his eyes. Right, she said. And how do you plan to pay for it? The man's face remained calm. With my card, of course. James stepped forward, his voice laced with mock concern. Sir, are you aware of the price of this suit? We require full payment up front, and there are no refunds. The old man reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek black credit card. He held it out to James, who hesitated, his smirk faltering slightly. Run the card, the man said calmly. I'll wait. James took the card reluctantly, muttering under his breath as he walked to the register. Tara stared at the man, unsure of what to say. The man simply adjusted his tie, his eyes betraying no emotion. What happened next would leave the staff, and the entire store, utterly speechless. James returned to the register with the old man's credit card in hand, his confidence waning as he processed the transaction. Tara hovered nearby, unable to mask her skepticism. Sir, James began hesitantly, this is a premium credit card. Are you sure this is yours? The old man raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor unshaken. Are you questioning my ability to pay? James hesitated, glancing at Tara for support. She shrugged, as if to say, your call. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by the soft beep of the card reader, signaling an approved transaction. The machine spit out the receipt, and James froze. Is there a problem? The man asked, his tone polite but firm. James forced a smile, handing the card and receipt back with an exaggerated flourish. No problem at all, sir. Thank you for your patronage. The old man pocketed his card and glanced down at the receipt, his expression betraying the faintest hint of amusement. Thank you. I'll wait for the tailoring to be completed. James exhaled, relieved that the interaction seemed to be over. Of course. Tara, please, escort our guest to the waiting area. Tara plastered on a tight smile and gestured for the man to follow her. As he settled into a leather chair near the boutique's lounge area, she whispered to James, What was that about? Did the card actually work? James frowned, leaning in conspiratorially. I don't know who this guy thinks he is, but there's no way he's for real. He's probably maxing out some inheritance card. The two exchanged smug grins, their condescension barely concealed. But their amusement was short-lived. As the old man sat quietly, several other employees began to notice him. Among them was Lila, the store's assistant manager, who prided herself on her ability to recognize high-profile clients. Who's that? Lila asked, as she approached James and Tara, her voice low but curious. James rolled his eyes. Just some guy wasting our time. He bought a suit, but I doubt he even knows how to tie a proper Windsor knot. Lila frowned, studying the man. There was something familiar about him, something she couldn't quite place. Are you sure? He looks distinguished. Maybe you should be careful how you treat him. James scoffed. Please, Lila, if he's so important, why does he look like he walked out of a thrift store? Before Lila could respond, the store's doors swung open, and a deliveryman entered carrying a large floral arrangement. The bouquet was extravagant, overflowing with exotic blooms and adorned with a sleek black envelope. Delivery for Mr. Wright, the man announced, his voice cutting through the chatter of the boutique. Tara and James exchanged confused glances. Mr. Wright? Tara whispered. Who's that? The delivery man approached the old man, who stood with a quiet nod of acknowledgement. That's me, he said simply. James and Tara watched, dumbfounded, as the delivery man handed over the arrangement and bowed slightly before leaving. The old man opened the envelope, his eyes scanning its contents briefly before tucking it away. What just happened? Tara muttered, her voice barely audible. Lila's expression had shifted from skepticism to alarm. Did he say, right? James furrowed his brow. Yeah, so? Lila's face paled. As in Henry Wright? The hotel magnate? The investor behind this entire luxury chain? The color drained from James's face as realization dawned. Number, that can't be. But Lila wasn't listening. She hurried over to the old man, her demeanor now entirely different. Mr. Wright, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm Lila, the assistant manager. Is there anything else we can do to make your experience more comfortable? The old man looked up, his expression unreadable. Thank you, Lila. You've been very kind. However, I must admit, my experience so far has been enlightening. Lila swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward James and Tara, who were frozen in place. I sincerely apologize if anything was less than satisfactory. Please, allow me to personally ensure that you receive the best service possible. The old man held her gaze for a moment before nodding slightly. Very well. Let's see how this unfolds. As Lila turned back toward James and Tara, her expression hardened. You two, she hissed under her breath, get over here. Now. The tension in the boutique was palpable as the three employees gathered near the old man. What followed would be a lesson they'd never forget. James and Tara shuffled toward the old man with their heads held low, the weight of Lila's glare pressing down on them. The boutique was eerily silent, save for the rustle of shopping bags and the faint hum of the overhead lights. Every other employee in the store had paused, sensing the tension. Their curiosity piqued. Lila broke the silence first, her voice firm but composed. Mr. Wright, I must extend my deepest apologies on behalf of our staff. If there's been any oversight or mistreatment, please know that it does not reflect our values. James and Tara exchanged nervous glances, realizing just how dire the situation had become. They looked at the old man, who now regarded them with an air of quiet authority. Is that so? The man said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that silenced even the faint whispers among the staff. Then perhaps you'd care to explain why I was treated as though I didn't belong here. Lila's face flushed, her confidence faltering. I assure you, sir, it's a misunderstanding. I'll personally ensure those responsible are held accountable. James couldn't hold back his indignation any longer. Look, we didn't know who he was, he blurted out, his voice cracking with a mix of panic and frustration. The old man tilted his head, his expression inscrutable. And who did you assume I was? He asked, his words measured and deliberate. Tara stammered, We just thought, that I didn't belong. He finished for her, his tone now sharp. That I wasn't your kind of customer. The question hung in the air, the accusation cutting through their flimsy excuses like a knife. Tara's face turned crimson, and James opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Lila intervened, trying to regain control of the situation. Mr. Wright, I assure you, this behavior is unacceptable. I will see to it that disciplinary action is taken immediately. The old man raised a hand, silencing her. Disciplinary action isn't enough, Ms. Lila, he said. The problem runs deeper than that. This is about mindset, a mindset that tells people like these two that it's acceptable to judge someone based on their appearance. Lila nodded, her cheeks burning with shame. You're absolutely right, sir. Please allow us to make amends. The old man stood, his posture commanding respect despite his modest clothing. Amends? He echoed. You think a simple apology can undo years of prejudice and arrogance? The boutique's door chimed as another customer entered, but no one looked up. All eyes remained fixed on the unfolding confrontation. I didn't come here today expecting royal treatment, the man continued. I came to see if this establishment was living up to the values it claims to represent. Inclusivity, respect, and excellence. Clearly it's fallen short. James's heart sank as the gravity of their actions began to hit him. He had assumed so much about this man, his worth, his place, his ability to pay, without ever considering that he might be wrong. "Sir," James said quietly, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry." The old man regarded him for a long moment before speaking. "Sorry for what? Sorry for what you said? Sorry for how you acted? Or sorry that you've been caught?" James's face flushed with shame. I don't know," he admitted, his voice trembling. "That's part of the problem," the man replied. "If you don't know what you're sorry for, how will you learn from this?" Tara's lip quivered as she finally found her voice. "Please, Mr. Wright," she said, "give us a chance to make this right." The old man sighed, his stern expression softening ever so slightly. "I didn't come here to humiliate anyone," he said. "But perhaps humiliation is what it takes for some lessons to stick." He turned to Lila, who straightened her posture. "Ms. Lila, I want to see real change here. This isn't about firing people. It's about educating them. I expect a full report on how you plan to address this." Lila nodded vigorously. "Of course, sir. I'll see to it personally." The old man stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the room. "Let this be a reminder," he said, his voice carrying an air of finality. "Respect is not something you give based on appearances. It's something you owe to everyone." The boutique staff stood in stunned silence as the man walked toward the door, his head held high. But just before he exited, he paused and turned back. "Oh, and one more thing," he said, his tone lighter now. "I'll be checking back. Let's see if you're as good at learning lessons as you are at making assumptions." With that, he walked out, leaving behind a room full of employees who would never forget the day Henry Wright taught them the true meaning of respect. As the boutique door swung shut behind Henry Wright, the air inside the store felt heavy, thick with the weight of shame and self-reflection. James and Tara stood frozen, their faces pale. For them, the shock of the situation was just beginning to settle in. Around them, their colleagues exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to say or do. Lila, still visibly shaken, turned to the staff. "Everyone, gather around," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the uneasy silence. Slowly, the boutique employees formed a circle near the main counter, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and apprehension. James and Tara shuffled in reluctantly, avoiding eye contact with their peers. "I hope today has been a lesson for all of us," Lila began, her tone resolute. "What happened here was unacceptable, not just to Mr. Wright, but to the values we claim to uphold. If we can't treat every person who walks through that door with dignity and respect, we have no business being here." James raised his hand hesitantly. "Ms. Lila," he said quietly, "we didn't mean—" Lila cut him off. "Intentions don't matter, James. Actions do. And your actions, along with Tara's, have embarrassed this entire establishment." Tara looked down at her shoes, her face a deep shade of crimson. "We didn't know he was the owner," she mumbled defensively. Lila's eyes narrowed. "And if he wasn't the owner, would that make your behavior acceptable? Would it be any less wrong to treat someone like that if they didn't have power or money?" Tara swallowed hard, unable to respond. "This isn't just about today," Lila continued, her voice softer now, but no less firm. "It's about the assumptions we make every day, the judgments we pass without even realizing it. Those judgments hurt people. They undermine everything we're supposed to stand for." The staff murmured in agreement, their unease growing. It was clear that Lila wasn't going to let this incident fade into the background. She was determined to make it a turning point. "I'll be scheduling mandatory training sessions on unconscious bias and customer relations," Lila announced. "And I expect every single one of you to take them seriously. This isn't optional, it's necessary." James and Tara exchanged uneasy glances. They knew they had no choice but to comply, but the idea of confronting their own prejudices was daunting. As the meeting ended, Lila pulled James and Tara aside. "I'll be speaking with both of you privately," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We need to talk about what this means for your future here." The two nodded silently, their faces a mix of fear and regret. It was clear that their actions had not only jeopardized their standing in the boutique, but also forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. Meanwhile, across town, Henry Wright sat at a modest cafe, sipping a cup of tea and reflecting on the day's events. He hadn't planned for things to unfold the way they had, but he couldn't deny the satisfaction he felt in holding the boutique accountable. As he gazed out the window, his thoughts drifted to the broader issue at hand. He knew that his experience at the boutique was just one example of a much larger problem, one that couldn't be solved with a single confrontation. Henry pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket and began jotting down ideas. He wanted to ensure that his position as the boutique's owner wasn't just a title, but a platform for meaningful change. Perhaps it was time to take his lessons beyond the walls of his store. "Excuse me," a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Henry looked up to see a young woman standing hesitantly by his table. She was one of the bystanders from the boutique earlier that day. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I saw what happened and it made me think about how I've judged people before, about how I can do better." Henry smiled warmly. "It takes courage to admit that," he said. "The first step to change is recognizing the need for it." The woman nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "I promise I'll do better," she said before hurrying off. Henry watched her go, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The events at the boutique may have been painful, but they had sparked something, a ripple of awareness that could grow into a wave of change. A week after the incident, the boutique buzzed with activity. The staff, dressed immaculately in their uniforms, stood in neat rows. The store had been closed for the day, and the luxurious interior felt even more grand in the absence of customers. This wasn't just another training session. This was the beginning of a new chapter. Henry Wright stood at the front of the room, his commanding yet approachable presence filling the space. Beside him stood Lila, her face composed but determined. The staff looked on, their expressions ranging from curiosity to nervous anticipation. "Thank you all for being here," Henry began, his voice calm but authoritative. "What happened last week was unacceptable, but it was also an opportunity, a wake-up call for all of us. Today isn't just about what went wrong, it's about how we move forward." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "This boutique is more than just a business to me. It's a reflection of my journey, a journey that wasn't easy, a journey that required resilience and a belief in the dignity of every person. And I expect everyone who represents this establishment to embody those same values." The staff nodded solemnly. Even James and Tara, who had been visibly defensive during the initial aftermath, seemed genuinely reflective now. Henry gestured toward a large screen behind him, where a slide appeared with bold letters. "These aren't just words," Henry said, his voice firm. "They're principles. Principles that will guide everything we do moving forward." The session that followed was unlike anything the staff had experienced before. It wasn't a dry lecture or a series of scolding remarks. Instead, it was an interactive, eye-opening exploration of biases, assumptions, and the impact of everyday actions. The staff participated in role-playing exercises, watched videos showcasing the real-life consequences of discrimination, and shared their own experiences, both as perpetrators and victims of prejudice. By the end of the day, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. There was a sense of vulnerability, but also hope. Later that afternoon, Henry pulled James and Tara aside. The two employees had been at the center of the controversy, and Henry wanted to address them directly. "I know this week hasn't been easy for you," Henry began, his tone gentle but firm. but growth never is. What matters now is how you choose to move forward. James spoke first, his voice shaky but sincere. Mr. Wright, I'm sorry. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I did, and I realize now how wrong I was. It wasn't just about you. It was about the way I see people. And I don't want to be that person anymore. Tara nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'm sorry too. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. I promise to do better. Henry studied them both for a moment before nodding. Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step, he said. But change is about action, not just words. I'll be watching closely to see how you implement what you've learned. Word of the incident and Henry's response spread quickly, not just among the boutique's regular customers, but throughout the local community. People admired Henry's composure and leadership, and many were inspired by his commitment to turning a negative experience into a teachable moment. Customers who had once hesitated to shop at the boutique began flocking in, drawn by the story of its owner and his dedication to creating an inclusive and welcoming environment. Sales soared, but more importantly, the store became a symbol of progress and empathy. Henry didn't stop there. He partnered with local organizations to create workshops on diversity and inclusion, not just for his employees, but for other businesses in the area. He also launched a scholarship fund for underprivileged youth, ensuring that his legacy would extend far beyond the walls of his boutique. One evening, as Henry closed the store, he found a handwritten note slipped under the door. It read, "Dear Mr. Wright, thank you for standing up for what's right. You've inspired me to believe in myself and to treat others with kindness, no matter who they are. You've shown that dignity and respect can change the world, one person at a time. With gratitude, a young admirer." Henry smiled as he folded the note and placed it in his pocket. The journey had been challenging, but moments like this reminded him why it was all worth it. As he locked the boutique's doors and stepped into the cool evening air, Henry looked up at the sky. He thought of his parents, who had instilled in him the values of hard work and compassion. He thought of the struggles he had faced and overcome. And he thought of the future, a future that, thanks to moments like these, seemed just a little bit brighter.